today I am very excited to welcome Debra Wesselmann to the podcast. Debra has specialized in treating attachment trauma for over 30 years. In 2008, along with several like-minded colleagues, she co-founded the Attachment and Trauma Center of Nebraska, where she co-developed and researched the integrative family therapy and EMDR therapy model for treating attachment trauma in children. In addition to her clinical work, she offers trainings and is on faculty with the EMDR Institute, founded by Francine Shapiro, PhD. She's authored and co-authored several articles, chapters, and books related to attachment and trauma, including the updated and expanded EMDR and Family Therapy Integrative Treatment for Attachment Trauma in Children, second edition. I am super excited to welcome Deb to the podcast today. Well, hi everybody. Welcome to today's episode of Attachment Theory in Action. Debra, I am so excited to welcome you back to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
You are so welcome. Debra, my longtime listeners will know that I like to start my episodes with the same question, and that is, was there anything in your early life, your early career, that led you down this path to working in the field of attachment, to EMDR? Tell us a little bit about your story.
Yeah, sure. My first career actually was an elementary school teacher. Of course, I always loved kids, and I taught fourth grade. And I taught though in an area where the neighborhood was very impoverished. There was a lot of troubles with substance abuse and alcoholism, and I had kids who, well, in 4 years of teaching, I had four parents commit suicide. So, there was just a lot of suffering. And the kids that I was teaching, I could see it. They had terrible mental health issues.
Mhm.
And I just got interested I wanted to help them with their mental health. That's what I really wanted to do.
Mhm.
And of course, their nervous systems were not in a place where they were really receptive to learning. And I did the best I could, but I think I learned a lot in that time period. And then also we were starting our family, and my middle child came to us through adoption and overseas adoption when she was 2.5, and I had so much to learn there. Um, and just became very passionate about kids, both, kids who are adopted and just kids who go through trauma. So when I started grad school, I just really soaked up everything that had anything to do with attachment or trauma. And then after grad school, well, I started working in 89. I was in private practice really by 1990. And then by 1995, I was taking EMDR training through Francine Shapiro. I was lucky enough that she was still doing the trainings. And it was early on. So the EMDR training booklet was like this big. Um, we didn't even have the term, I don't think, developmental trauma or
Mhm.
complex trauma. Um, and I was working with these kids that I was, really bringing into my practice. I was so passionate about, but I knew, you know, they weren't going to just sit down and let me follow my script, you know.
Mhm.
Um, so I was trying to adapt and figure out some ways, and I knew I needed to integrate it with family therapy work. And early on, I began talking to Francine about what I was doing. She attended, I did a little presentation at Andrea's conference, and she attended it, called me at home. I was like, oh my gosh, I was terrified. I was like, what did I do wrong? But she was actually very interested in what I was doing, and ended up inviting me to present with her a couple of times. I was very honored, and then invited me to do a couple of chapters, write a couple of chapters with her. And I learned so much through all of that. Um, So that's kind of the beginning. And then I had a couple of consultees in like 2005, Kathy Schweitzer and Stephanie Armstrong, who who were teachers and wanted to get into the mental health field, and they were excited about all this, and they really helped me hone my protocols and helped me write the first book. And they are off now. They started some centers, some more centers where they're using this protocol on an outpatient basis, and they are busy growing those. And they they were like, "You go ahead, write this second book without us." I don't think so. Some people love writing and some people don't love it. I love it, but and so I was like, okay, that is fine. But yeah, but I'm grateful for all the work they did on the initial part, and they helped with the research. We did a case series of 23 families and did a research study that we published in 2018 as well, and learned a lot through that as well.
Mhm.
And since the first book came out in 2014, yeah, I've learned more in terms of really honing it with adolescents and with kids with fetal alcohol exposure and other substance exposure, neurodivergence, and severe dissociation. That's a big topic. I think that I've brought into this second book. The folks over in the Netherlands who have done work with this protocol found in some of their research that kids who are highly dissociative are the kids that make the slowest progress, which actually not surprising.
Right.
So, I knew that's something we really need to zero in on a lot. Mhm.
Okay, well, we will get to that in just a minute.
Okay.
I wanted to pose a question to you. I'm curious, kind of personally curious, but also for the podcast and our listeners. And um, for those people listening who maybe haven't heard the first podcast episode that you did with my predecessor, Karen, um, that maybe you speak to it in there, but I'm curious, what was it about EMDR that really drew you in, that you were like, this is the work that I need to be doing with these kids? Because for us, for our organization at Chaddock, we have our treatment model, and EMDR comes for us at the very top of that treatment pyramid. And so we use a lot of different modalities. And so, yeah, I'm curious, what was it for you that you were like, this is the work I need to be doing, and I'm really drawn to this particular therapy?
I'll tell you what it was for me. It's the way it activates one's internal processing so that the connections, the insights, the ahas are so much coming from within.
Mhm.
And up until then, I I found myself a lot of times, as many therapists do, in kind of you get into this back and forth where you're trying to persuade someone to
Mhm.
look at a situation from a different perspective. And that's all well and good. And, we can get this intellectual shift and understanding, but it doesn't mean that it gets down to that gut level where it
Mhm.
really feels true. So many times I have people come in and they say, I know up here, for example, that sexual abuse was not my fault, but yet I have so much shame that I carry. So it's getting what we know up here down to here. And of course, when we're working with kids, of course, they also lack a lot of the intellectual understanding, and there's more that we have to do there to
Mhm.
shore them up. But still, it's it's just so interesting seeing the internal shifts and the ahas. And I've done my own EMDR work, and I got to experience what that was like, that moment of, oh, oh, I get it now, or I really feel it now.
Hmm.
Um, that just didn't come with just the talking.
Hmm.
So yeah, so I just it really became a passion, yeah, for me early on. I was even when I got trained in EMDR therapy, I was in the process of getting certified as a hypnotherapist. And I thought, well, that would be my way to address trauma.
Hmm.
But even that's all me imposing my thoughts onto you. And I change your state so that you're receptive to my thoughts. And I just was drawn so much to this idea of helping clients make those connections internally for themselves and find those shifts internally. And it gets me out of, rather than as a hypnotherapist, you're in this sort of position of power, where you're directing the show. And I really never was that comfortable with that. I
Hmm.
do still like to use my sort of hypnotherapy voice when I'm doing like safe place, helping people really vivify a safe place image or another resource piece of work. It's nice to just use some of those tools in that way. But other than that, I don't really use the hypnotherapy anymore. I just
I
found,
don't, I love your way of describing that, Deborah, that because to me, what you're really describing is the the healthy attachment experience of a healthy attachment experience that that should happen in that infant caregiver relationship of what starts outside goes inside, but then it becomes solidified inside for us to then portray back out, right, to the world.
right.
And so it almost sounds like you're helping somebody rediscover what should have been created there in the first place. Does that make sense?
Yes, it totally does. I think that's exactly right. Yeah.
Instead of then it,
Yeah.
but and not impose it by not imposing your stuff or our stuff as the clinician, we're really helping them find that true kind of that true self that should have been embraced and
Yeah.
unharmed and cared for and loved and secure in the first place.
Yeah. Yes, we're bringing the true self forward. We're helping people access like their own internal resources and for their own toward their own healing and
Mhm,
growth.
mhm,
Yeah. And
mhm.
that is what an attachment figure does for us.
Right.
Yeah.
Or
Or
should do.
should.
The healthy one should do.
Yeah.
So you mentioned, and again, maybe for our newer listeners, can you maybe, this is a big ask, uh, give us just a brief overview of your protocol, your integrative attachment trauma protocol, just in a nutshell, maybe,
Nutshell.
even though you've just
Sure.
written two books about it.
Sure. So in this new book, um I have really organized it into 3 stages because that's what the Dutch folks are doing with it. And it was like, oh, that makes so much sense. So stage 1 is parent psychoeducation, and they influenced me in that they do 6, and they're kind of, this is how we do it, which is okay. I'm maybe a little bit more, fluid, but um, they do 6 parent psychoeducation sessions. And and within that, so the way I view it is within the parent psychoeducation sessions, I'm also doing the history taking and case conceptualization. And as I'm drawing information from the parent, I'm conceptualizing the case and then showing them this conceptualization so that they are understanding their children through then this lens of attachment and trauma. And then I'm, guiding them in terms of um, how we respond to, non-secure behaviors and actions of their children from a place of a secure base to stabilize their child's behaviors. Then phase two would be really the considered maybe the preparation for the trauma work. So phase two is, I call it, really building good feelings and building connection. And so we are using both, just family therapy work and EMDR resource development work, just slow bilateral stimulation to deepen positive affect in the child that we are able to access through, some of the, just like fun, playful activities where we're bringing forward good feelings. And a lot of times we're bringing forward good feelings of connection. So we're
Mhm.
developing moments of connection, playful moments, um, um, moments of parents, really attuning to kids, their fun resources, their characteristics, their qualities that are lovable and special. And we're really talking about those and bringing those out. And then we're deepening the good feelings in the child. We're doing a lot of work on building up that child's really what I, in the book, I call the biggest kid self, that
Mhm.
most mature state, um, and helping the child get in touch with how it feels in them when they are in their biggest 8-year-old self or 13-year-old self or whatever age they are. Because, as we know, kids who have had a lot of developmental trauma, they developmentally maturity wise, they are not where they would be because of all of the
Mhm.
trauma. So we're really sort of bringing them into a more mature state and really trying to develop that connection and that trust.
If I may, to me, it sounds very much like one, you're speaking to, their back brain, where you're creating this felt
Mhm.
safety and adding to those positive attachment experiences that they maybe missed earlier on in life. We're recreating, adding, developing those with their current caregiver.
Absolutely, absolutely. Playfully and through a lot of we call messages of love, where the parents talk about the things that they most enjoy about the child and the um the magical chord of love, where we visualize this beautiful light from that runs from the parent's heart to the child's heart, and it no matter where they are or no matter what's happening, and we deepen that again, that
Mhm.
sense of connection with the slow BLS.
Mhm.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
I'm thinking, so I'm a fairly new mother myself. Well, she's
Oh,
almost 2, so maybe not so new anymore.
well, that's
But
pretty new.
so a lot of what I talk about with folks on the podcast, resonates with me and the experiences that we've had and are having. And, I think for a general person who is not in the clinical field, it's attachment is a hard concept to wrap their head around. Um, it's, I mean, especially so if you haven't had a secure attachment experience. But to me, what you're describing, I think some might listen and think, what is she talking about? This light, this connecting light. But that is something as a mother that I feel like I have goosebumps now just hearing you say that. And that is the feeling that I have with my young child. And so I don't know, there's just wow, there's just a lot that comes up when you talk about that and the what I feel for children and young people that haven't had that experience, what I feel for caregivers who haven't had that or have wanted to provide that and haven't been able to. So I don't know, that just kind of stirred some things up for me.
Yeah, that's so great. And for kids, it's if they've had a lot of developmental trauma, it's like, the Piaget, the developmentalist talked about object constancy. And
Hmm.
really, if you've never had a secure attachment and that sense that that attachment figure is going to be there for you no matter what,
Hmm.
and that that love is constant, even if you can't see them and they're somewhere else, or even if they have an angry face, or
Right.
or they're paying attention to a brother or sister, which we know is so hard for these kids. Um, yeah, then for them, the the connection is just gone. You
Hmm.
look away, your attention is elsewhere. There's no connection, it's just gone. I've lost you, you've gone away. And you think about how awful that must feel for them. That every time the parent pays attention to another child or the parent goes off to work, for them, it feels like it's gone. The attachment is gone. The connection is gone.
Hmm.
And Bowlby talked about that secure base from which you can go off then and explore the world. Like, how do you ever then feel secure enough and safe enough to go off and explore the world if you think that that's just gone every time you leave?
Hmm. Hmm.
So it's so, so important, such a big deal to create that sense. They say attachment isn't love, but to me, a secure attachment is the fertile ground from which love can grow.
Hmm.
Um, and it just calms that anxiety and calms that nervous system.
Hmm.
So, and we can't expect to just move in and start processing trauma with kids if they have no sense of connection and no secure base that's holding them. They have to be held emotionally in
Hmm.
order to be able to open up and access those memories for reprocessing.
Hmm.
So that
That would be where your phase three comes in.
that's where my phase three comes in. Yeah, then we can move into phase three. And then we even have, really gentle ways we can do that.
Hmm.
So, one thing we do is we start with slower, um, I'm sorry, we start by targeting triggers. We move into it slowly by starting with triggers and reprocessing triggers first, just calming their nervous system around some of these triggers. And then we also create a therapeutic story that makes sense of the things that happen, that gives them adaptive information around the events that have happened to them. And we read the story with fast BLS probably several times before we start targeting individual events in the story. And it's just such a gentler way to move into it. I don't know if you're familiar with Joan Lovett's work. She wrote Small Wonders, which back in 19, I think she wrote that back in 1998 or seven. And it's the storytelling EMDR method. And she started using that with younger children and pre-verbal trauma. And we just find it so helpful for all the kids because, you know, when there are these events that are traumatic to them, such as even just being maybe starting life in an orphanage or or maybe having a biological parent who was addicted to drugs, or witnessing domestic violence. Like, we cannot expect that child to automatically be able to integrate that trauma with adaptive information in their brain when it's a trauma that is hard to make sense of.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I have to sit and take time and think about how to write about this event in a way that will make sense of it for the child.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we do that, it and we include in the story lots of good stuff too. We start out with, just how they were born lovable and good and a good heart and so on. And then we add, and there was this difficult thing that happened, which was, for example, maybe this beautiful child had a parent who loved them, but the parent had a problem with these kinds of bad drugs that make their brains foggy, so they couldn't take care of the child. And so, this little baby might have thought they weren't loved or lovable or good enough. And the truth was they were lovable and good. It was just a situation where um, the mom just didn't know, just couldn't help herself with these bad drugs, and she just couldn't get past it enough to care for her child. So we make sense of it,
Mm-hmm.
add the BLS, and then later we go back and use more standard protocol and say, now when I read that part of the story, like, what do you see in your brain? And what are the thoughts that come into your brain, and what are the feelings? And then we can do the more um, standard protocol approach to really get that
Mm-hmm.
fully processed and integrated. And it
I
works
think
beautifully doing it that way.
I think Deb, you highlight a really important point. What's wonderful about the world that we live in now is that therapy and counseling and managing our mental health has become much more widely accepted. But I think that there's still a big misunderstanding of, I think about families who maybe take their child to therapy and they wonder why are you doing joyful, playful things in therapy when we've got problems we need to figure out.
Mhm.
And you know as you're talking and about this kind of storytelling approach, it really makes me think of, we wouldn't give a 7-year-old an adult's book to read about death, right? We just wouldn't do that. We give them a story that tells them about it. And so I think you just highlight such a great point that there's so much more education that needs to be done for families, which is why I love that there's a big focus on the psychoeducation piece in your approach for families to understand this is why we're doing these approaches. And you said earlier, we can't just come in and process those traumas. There's steps that have to happen before that. And so I just love that your approach takes those pieces into account. And as you just said, then when we get to that point, then we start using some more of that language that, okay, now how do your thoughts change when that happens? Or what are you thinking about now that's different from before? And there's some of that more CBT kind of stuff coming
Yeah.
in.
Yeah, we can do that and get that kind of um, set up in a way that once we start the reprocessing, then it goes very smoothly. And of
Mhm.
course, we can drop little seeds as they're processing, little seeds of information, and we do it with the parents right there supporting the child. Unless there are situations where that's not appropriate, but most of the time, if we've developed the trust and the connection, um, we want to create this like cocoon of warmth and nurturing and safety for the child in that kind of environment. they can then open up their hearts to this, this difficult, these hurts, these wounds, this difficult
Mhm. Mhm.
material. Yeah.
Deb, we've kind of shifted away a little bit from the book, so let's come back to it.
Sure.
I know we're talking about your approach and so on, but I want to be mindful that you have written the second edition.
Yeah.
Um, I guess tell us a little bit about, and you've mentioned some about what has kind of led to and what's been included in the second edition, in the revised edition.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Gosh, a lot. So one thing is the first edition really focused on the team approach, which I'm still a big proponent of having a team, family therapist, EMDR therapist team, because it it just makes everything go so much smoothly when you're working really as a team with a child, but not everybody has that luxury.
Mhm.
So I'm also focused more in this book on how to apply this protocol as a solo therapist. And I spend a lot, um, I should say, each part of the book, I'm interweaving also more about how to work with the teenagers, the older kids, because so many kids arrive at the therapist's doorstep at 13, 14 years of age. It
Mhm.
seems to be when they reach that age of autonomy and individuation, but they still haven't really accomplished the earlier phases.
Mhm.
That's sometimes when the parents are seeing some big stuff and they become aware that, wow, there's something going on. Um, and so that, and then I've also discovered through the years that there's a big piece with a lot of these kids who were exposed to substances in utero. And, it wasn't until after the first book came out that I really came to appreciate that piece. And I believe that parents need the psychoeducation around that, number one, to separate what's trauma, what's behaviors from what is a natural result of being exposed to substances prenatally and the effects that that has on the brain. And then we have to be able to modify our approach even more sometimes to help those kids who maybe they don't have the ability to reason. They need even more help with processing. Um, they are very concrete oftentimes. Their memories, like kids who were exposed to alcohol prenatally, oftentimes they can remember something one day or know something one day and it's forgotten the next. So, their memory is very spotty. And I didn't always appreciate that, recognize that. And then kids with other forms of neurodivergence. And of
Mhm.
course, developmental trauma itself is kind of a form of neurodivergence because it does impact the brain and development. But if you add on top of that, if there is autism spectrum disorder or ADHD, and then there's the other kind of learning disabilities, we need to be cognizant of all of that and respectful of their brain and the way their brain works. And and we know now that kids, where if the adults in their lives are not recognizing the brain differences for whatever is the cause, and they're having expectations that are not appropriate for those brain differences. That in itself is traumatic for the child.
Mhm.
When they're living in a world where of people whose brains don't work the same as their brains, and they
Mhm.
have expectations of them that don't match. So
Mhm.
that's a big deal. And then the other piece that I've included much more of in this book is I have a whole chapter on dissociation. Um, because that's, well, of course, one of the things we know is the attachment relationship is an antidote to dissociation. But I think parents who do have kids who are dissociative often don't recognize what that is, and they don't realize how how they are key to helping those children. And then there are things we can do in therapy as well to help kids who are more dissociative. And dissociation is a natural thing, and we all do it a little bit here and there to some extent.
Mhm.
But it's something that can really get in the way of progress for kids who are highly dissociative, who carry a lot of trauma. It's just their brain naturally protecting them. So
Mhm.
that's another piece that's really, really important, I think.
So what I hear throughout what you just said as a consistent theme is how do we better educate our parents and caregivers in these different areas to help them be the best that they can be for their children. And so I almost feel like your additional chapters have kind of this twofold approach. One is for the parents, but the other is for the clinician, and how do we help the child now that comes to me and who maybe is has autism spectrum disorder, or or who is a teenager. So I love that you've made those additions. And I really think that it's needed, particularly the neurodivergent population. And even just on the simplest level of how do I even understand the differences, and like you mentioned about teaching parents about just differences in the brain. And while scary, I think that could be extremely empowering too, to understand that actually your child's brain is different, is working differently. And so now we know that, we recognize that. Now we can support them in a way that works for their brain, not one
Yeah.
that would have developed a different way.
Yeah, or the other kids in your family, like their brain may not work that way at all. And so what works for them is not going to be working for your child. And, just like they need accommodations at school, they need accommodations in the home.
Mhm.
Like the child who has maybe neurodivergence and maybe needs assistance with tasks that previously maybe the parents thought, oh, they're just being resistant. Maybe they told them to clean their room and they're sitting in the middle of their room and nothing's been done. And
Mhm.
the parent is assuming this is some kind of a behavioral problem when really maybe they have ADHD and they cannot get
Mhm. Mhm.
themselves organized. They have no idea how to organize the things around, or they're just sitting there and that maybe they're they have autism and they are just lining up all of their red cars, and now they're lining up all of their green cars in the middle of the floor, and to that child they are organizing their room.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
you know
Right.
so really understanding the way their brains work and how they see the world, it's going to help. It helps so much with the attachment relationship, because it's very difficult to be securely attached to a parent who doesn't understand your brain and
Mhm.
is maybe constantly irritated with you because you're not following the instructions that they're giving. And
Or potentially even, and this is mentioned right at the very start of the book, but it stood out to me that the parent or caregiver is frightened of the child, and that comes off in my facial expression, which is then frightening for the child because you aren't keeping me safe because you're scared of me.
yes, that is a really good point. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that happens a lot. And I think I see it a lot in the families that come in.
And I'm particularly thinking about in the with the teenage population, because when your child starts getting bigger too, physically bigger, and is maybe the same height as you, um, those behaviors that were once a little more manageable then become unmanageable and potentially scary for everyone.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. Yeah. Hmm.
Um, Just a little bit more. We're almost out of time. You mentioned this earlier, and I don't know if there's a little more that you can dive into, but in your book, you talk about this biggest kid self. And I think maybe our listeners would like to just maybe hear a little bit more about what you mean by the biggest kid self.
Yeah, yeah. So one of the things that we, recognize in these kids and I want to credit my colleague Ann Potter um for years ago her work in parts work
Hmm.
and had such a big influence on me even back in 89. I heard her speak once and I've worked with her for years and years now, but um she's been a big influence. And when I started looking at these kids, I realized, all right, with these kids who are carrying all this trauma, I'm also working with littler parts on the inside.
Hmm.
And so often when they're triggered, there's a littler part that is actually operating and triggered. And we see these kids go back and forth between, maybe a little bit more mature state and then a regress state, a little bit more mature and then a regress state. And parents are pulling their hair out. Well, we've got, a littler kid part of self. And before I work directly with the littler kid part of self, which is one of the things we do in our preparation phase 2, I want to really strengthen that. If it's an 8-year-old, I want to strengthen the 8-year-old self. For a 13-year-old, I want to strengthen the 13-year-old self. And we have this resource development installation protocol that EMDR therapists have all learned, I think, at some point in their training, that we simplify and we adapt it with kids so that what we're doing is we're trying to bring forward their biggest kid self in the sessions. And then we're using slow BLS to help them to deepen and strengthen that biggest kid self. And we have to help kids get in, get get connected to it. We help them become aware of how do they stand? What's their body posture when they're in their, let's say it's an 8-year-old, your biggest 8-year-old self. What do you notice in your body? And they can all tell you how it feels and how they might stand or how their voice sounds or their face looks. And we deepen that, and then we do role plays with it, like having a redo. That thing that happened yesterday? Let's imagine you could go back to yesterday and handle that situation in your big 8-year-old self. Let's play it out. So we do a lot of role plays and little plays or puppet plays. And so we'll act it out and I'll put we have little buzzies we use a lot for EMDR, the little tactile pulsers. We'll put them in their pockets or shoes and we'll turn it on slow while we act it out, playfully. But it really does a lot to help them become aware and have more capacity to step into that 8-year-old self. And of course, with parents, we want to really do a lot of education around this isn't about telling them to stop being a baby or, it's about celebrating that biggest kid self and looking for those moments where you see that. And then, oh, I love it when you're in your 8-year-old self and, give me a high five or whatever. We just want to reinforce it and really bring that forward. And for kids who are highly dissociative, that becomes really important, to constantly be activating that biggest kid self. And then we do work with tucking in the littler ones and creating safe places on the inside and giving parents opportunity to talk about nurturing of those little parts on the inside. And then we reinforce that with slow BLS as well. So we're
I'm
healing and
just,
nurturing.
Deborah, my brain is just, there's, if there was an emoji on this screen, there'd be hearts all around my face because what you're saying is just, I mean, it makes sense to me because I work in this field, but
Yeah.
um, I'm thinking about that's what we do for our young children, right? How many times have I said to my daughter, "Whoa, you're getting so big and you're so good at that," right? That's the message that you're giving to that 8, 9, 13-year-old child of you're so big and so strong and you're creating in the EMDR terms this resource, but you are creating a strength in that child to go to when they're feeling overwhelmed, giving them that message that you have it within you
Yeah.
to be big and strong and all of these great things that you are as this big kid.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. That's
as
exactly right. Strengthening that state and giving them more capacity to step into that state.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm.
Yeah. And so getting them back on the right developmental trajectory, really helping kind of push their development forward
Mhm.
because it's been so interrupted oftentimes.
I
Yeah.
wish I could watch you at work, Deborah, because I think it would be phenomenal. And I just think about the message of hope for a child and a family that's working with this approach, when so often it feels like there's no hope, that we've tried everything. And not to say that there aren't other modalities out there doing phenomenal work also,
Oh,
but
yeah.
this
Oh,
is
there's a
one to
lot
go
of
in.
wonderful. And like I say, use them all.
Exactly, exactly.
Their
Yeah.
play therapy, all the things. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Deborah, I think I could talk to you all afternoon. It has been wonderful having you as a guest on the podcast. We will be sure to put all of the details of the book in the show notes and where people will be able to purchase it from. I thoroughly recommend it, and hopefully you'll be back again one day in the future for episode number 3.
Be great. Christy, it's been a joy. Thank you so much.